I need to tell you something that made me physically sick when I read it yesterday. For 23 years, while Jeffrey Epstein was building a global trafficking network that destroyed over 1,200 lives, the FBI sat on a criminal complaint that could have stopped it all in 1996. Let me say that again. They had him in 1996, and they did nothing. In my 27 years analyzing cover-ups and institutional failures at CIA, I thought I'd seen the worst of how government agencies protect the powerful while abandoning the vulnerable. But what the Department of Justice released yesterday about the Epstein files represents something so morally bankrupt, so systematically corrupt, that it challenges everything we thought we knew about federal law enforcement. Yesterday was supposed to be a moment of transparency. Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. The law was crystal clear: 30 days to release everything unclassified, searchable, downloadable, available to the public. But instead of compliance, we got exactly what I've seen countless times in intelligence agencies when they're protecting something explosive. Partial compliance, strategic delays, and redactions that violate the spirit and letter of the law. I want you to understand why this matters beyond just Jeffrey Epstein. What we're witnessing is the real-time breakdown of constitutional governance. When federal agencies refuse to comply with laws passed by Congress, we're not dealing with bureaucratic delays. We're dealing with institutional rebellion against democratic oversight. Let me take you back to September 1996, because this is where the entire 23-year nightmare could have ended before it truly began. Maria Farmer, a professional photographer, walked into the FBI's Miami field office with evidence that Jeffrey Epstein had stolen photographs of her two younger sisters, ages 12 and 16, and was possibly selling them as child pornography. Not allegations, not rumors. A formal criminal complaint with specific evidence of child sexual exploitation. What did the FBI do with this complaint? They filed it away and apparently forgot it existed for 23 years. No follow-up investigation, no interviews with Epstein, no search warrants, no contact with the victims, nothing. The complaint sat in FBI files while Epstein trafficked over 1,000 additional victims across the globe. When I read Maria Farmer's words yesterday after the files were released, I felt the same nausea I experienced in 2003 when I realized how thoroughly the CIA had corrupted intelligence about Iraq's weapons programs. She said she was shedding tears of joy for myself, but also tears of sorrow for all the other victims that the FBI failed. That's the voice of someone who tried to do the right thing and watched a system designed to protect people systematically destroy them instead. Here's what my intelligence background tells me about this timeline. In 1996, Jeffrey Epstein was not yet the globally connected billionaire he later became. His operation was smaller, his network less established, his political connections more limited. A serious FBI investigation in 1996 could have unraveled everything before it metastasized into the international trafficking network that destroyed so many lives. But there's something even more disturbing about the FBI's inaction, something that connects to patterns I witnessed throughout my CIA career. When agencies refuse to investigate credible evidence of serious crimes, it's usually because someone powerful is being protected. The question isn't just why the FBI ignored Maria Farmer's complaint. The question is who they were protecting and why. Let me show you how yesterday's document release confirms the worst suspicions about institutional cover-up. The Department of Justice assigned 200 attorneys to review the Epstein files before public release. 200 lawyers spending months reviewing documents that Congress explicitly ordered released within 30 days. What were they doing for all that time? What were they removing, redacting, or strategically delaying? Representative Ro Khanna, who co-sponsored the transparency law, immediately called out the DOJ for violating the statute. He pointed out that the law requires written justification for every redaction, and according to Khanna, there is not a single explanation. That's not oversight, that's obstruction. When federal agencies ignore the specific requirements of laws passed by Congress, they're operating outside constitutional boundaries. But here's where the released documents become truly explosive and why I believe we're seeing evidence of ongoing cover-up. Among the thousands of photographs released, there are multiple images of Bill Clinton in various private settings with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. One photo shows Clinton in a hot tub, relaxed, arms behind his head, next to someone whose face is completely redacted. Another shows him in a pool with Maxwell, and another person whose face is blacked out. Now, here's the critical detail that most people are missing. The Epstein Files Transparency Act specifically states that the DOJ can only redact identities to protect victims and minors. Read that again. If the person next to Bill Clinton in that hot tub had their face redacted, the Justice Department is officially identifying that person as either a victim or a minor. That's not speculation or political interpretation. That's what the redaction policy legally means. Think about the implications. A former president of the United States photographed in intimate settings with individuals the Department of Justice has classified as victims or minors. And this evidence has been sitting in federal files for years, while Clinton maintained he had limited social contact with Epstein. The White House immediately seized on these photos, with Deputy Press Secretary Abigail Jackson posting, "Here is Bill Clinton in a hot tub next to someone whose identity has been redacted." Per the Epstein Files Transparency Act, DOJ was specifically instructed only to redact the faces of victims and/or minors. Time for the media to start asking real questions. Clinton's spokesperson responded defensively, claiming the photos are grainy 20-plus-year-old images and insisting this isn't about Bill Clinton. But when you've spent decades analyzing how powerful people deflect accountability, that response sounds exactly like someone who knows the evidence is damaging and hopes media coverage will focus on the age of the photos rather than their content. But the Clinton photos are just one piece of a much larger puzzle that the DOJ is trying to keep hidden. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche revealed that during their review process, they identified more than 1,200 victims and their families. 1,200 individual human beings whose lives were destroyed by Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation. Let me put that number in perspective. We're not talking about 1,200 incidents or 1,200 cases. We're talking about 1,200 separate people whose identities are now known to the federal government. The DOJ has a file titled Masseuse List containing 254 names, all completely redacted. This document alone proves that Epstein wasn't opportunistically exploiting victims. He was running an organized trafficking network with systematic record-keeping and recruitment operations. If the DOJ knows who these 1,200 victims are, what is being done to help them? Have they all been contacted? Have they been offered services and support? Are there ongoing criminal investigations into everyone who participated in trafficking or abusing these victims? The Justice Department has been silent on these questions, focusing their public statements on redaction policies while avoiding accountability for what happened to these 1,200 people. Here's what troubles me most as someone who spent decades watching how intelligence agencies handle sensitive information. The DOJ claims they needed 200 attorneys and months of review time to protect victim privacy. But protecting victims doesn't require withholding internal DOJ communications about charging decisions. It doesn't require completely redacting grand jury testimony. It doesn't require delaying release of documents that have nothing to do with victim identities. Representative Thomas Massie, who co-sponsored the transparency legislation, was blunt in his assessment. He said Attorney General Pam Bondi and Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche have grossly failed to comply with both the spirit and letter of the law. When sitting members of Congress from both parties are accusing the Justice Department of violating federal law, we're witnessing a constitutional crisis in real time. But there's something even more disturbing about the document release that reminds me of the worst cover-up tactics I witnessed at CIA. A document containing 119 pages of grand jury testimony was released completely redacted, not partially redacted with victim names removed. Completely blacked out, every single page. That's not victim protection, that's evidence concealment. The same pattern appears throughout the released files. Internal DOJ emails about charging decisions, missing draft indictments that could explain prosecutorial strategy, absent witness interview memoranda that could reveal what investigators knew and when, not included. These documents would answer the most important questions about the Epstein case, and they're exactly the documents the DOJ is refusing to release. I've seen this pattern before when intelligence agencies want to create the appearance of transparency while maintaining actual secrecy. Release thousands of pages of documents that look impressive, but carefully exclude anything that reveals institutional failure or powerful people's involvement. Give the public enough information to feel like they're getting transparency while withholding everything that actually matters. What makes this case particularly infuriating is understanding how many additional victims could have been protected if the FBI had simply done its job in 1996. We know from the release timeline that Epstein's first major criminal investigation didn't begin in Palm Beach until 2005. That's 9 years after Maria Farmer's complaint. 9 years during which Epstein expanded his operation, recruited more victims, and built the international network that protected him for so long. Think about what those 9 years represent. How many 12-year-olds were trafficked because the FBI ignored evidence in 1996? How many 16-year-olds were abused because federal law enforcement chose not to investigate credible complaints? How many lives were destroyed because protecting powerful people was more important than protecting children? The released photographs reveal the scope of Epstein's social network and raise uncomfortable questions about what people knew and when they knew it. Beyond Clinton, the images show Donald Trump, Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, Steve Bannon, Kevin Spacey, Woody Allen, and dozens of other prominent figures. Simply appearing in photographs with Epstein doesn't prove criminal activity, but it does show how thoroughly he had infiltrated elite social circles. What troubles me about these photographs is what they suggest about willful ignorance among powerful people. When you're repeatedly visiting a private island where there are consistently young women present, when you're attending parties where inappropriate behavior is occurring, when you hear rumors and warnings about someone's preferences, at what point does willful ignorance become complicity? These are exactly the questions that a proper FBI investigation in 1996 could have answered. Instead of building cases against everyone who enabled Epstein's trafficking, we're left with photographs and speculation 27 years later. The DOJ has promised to release additional documents in the coming weeks, but based on yesterday's partial compliance and strategic delays, I'm not optimistic about full transparency. When federal agencies are actively violating laws passed by Congress, when they're refusing to provide required justifications for redactions, when they're withholding documents that have nothing to do with victim protection, it's because they're protecting something explosive. FBI Director Kash Patel released a statement alongside the file release claiming the Bureau is entering a new era defined by integrity, accountability, and unwavering pursuit of justice. He promised no cover-ups, no missing documents, and vowed to pursue anyone who undermines transparency. Those are bold words, but they ring hollow when the Department of Justice is actively violating congressional transparency requirements. If Patel is serious about accountability, he needs to explain why the FBI sat on Maria Farmer's 1996 complaint for 23 years. He needs to identify who made the decision to ignore credible evidence of child sexual exploitation. He needs to investigate whether there was active obstruction of the Epstein investigation and whether powerful people were protected at victims' expense. But here's what really keeps me awake about this case. If federal agencies can ignore criminal complaints about child trafficking for 23 years, if they can refuse to comply with laws passed by Congress, if they can redact evidence to protect powerful people while claiming to protect victims, then our entire system of accountability has collapsed. The 1,200 victims identified in these files deserve protection in 1996. They deserved investigation, prosecution, and justice. Instead, they got 23 years of institutional betrayal, while their abuser built an international trafficking network protected by wealth, connections, and federal law enforcement's willful blindness. Maria Farmer tried to warn the FBI in 1996. 400 other victims have been identified. 1,200 lives were destroyed, and the people responsible for this systematic failure are still withholding evidence while claiming they're protecting the very people they failed to protect for over 2 decades. That's not justice. That's institutional corruption on a scale that threatens the foundation of democratic governance. And until every document is released, every failure is acknowledged, and everyone responsible is held accountable, we're not dealing with transparency. We're dealing with the continuation of a 27-year cover-up that enabled one of the most devastating trafficking networks in American history. The question isn't just what the FBI knew in 1996. The question is what they're still hiding today and why they think protecting powerful people is more important than protecting the 1,200 victims whose lives were destroyed while they looked the other way.